Welcome to the Sterilization Station. This is a podcast that empowers and inspires sterile processing professionals. I'm your host, Bill Rishell, here to bring you insights, innovations, and expert discussions to elevate sterile processing departments everywhere. In each episode, we'll explore ways to strengthen department culture, embrace growth, and impact patient safety. We'll bring you interviews with industry-leading vendors and showcase technologies transforming our field, making our jobs easier and more efficient. From hot topics and infection control to best practices and overcoming challenges, the Sterilization Station is your place to learn, grow, and connect. So whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, there's something here for everyone. So buckle up and get ready to thrive in sterile processing. Let's dive in. So I'm really excited today. It's not that often you get to interview someone who you've been privileged to work with, and I would say is a good friend of mine, Cliff Russell. He works for Steris IMS as a product manager, and I'm just really excited today. So I'm going to go ahead and read his bio, and then looking forward to a great discussion today. So Cliff is a native of Atlanta, Georgia. He started his career as a surgical scrub tech and SPD tech and has worked for the past 23 years as a repair technician, educator, a product manager for Steris IMS. During this time with Steris, he has implemented many successful proactive programs across the country. Cliff has been focused on the California, Washington, and Oregon market since 2009 and is passionate about educating central services to make patients safer. Welcome, Cliff. How's it going?
Going well. Thank you for having me, Bill. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation. And as we were, just discussing different topics that we thought would be beneficial to the sterilization station, you have brought up a great topic that I know you're very passionate about, and that is cycles in sterile processing. And so we're just going to dive into our conversation and waste no time. And so really would like to hear your thoughts concerning what do you mean by cycles in the context of sterile processing?
Well, one of the things I do is I go in and I look at touch points because I'm working for a repair company. Something that we try to do is we try to help identify where the damage might be coming from, right? So it helps our customers reduce their repair costs. And in doing that and looking at the cycles looking at the touch points that I see, it seems to be it's just a finger pointing back and forth. OR does this, SPD does that, OR does this, SPD does that. And just from my experience over the last several years of doing these observations, I see the same cycles over and over. And what a lot of times it comes down to, people don't know expectations. If you don't revisit your processes and your policies once a year, once every 2 years, that's what keeps you grounded, because you've got new people coming in all the time. You've got people that may have been there 30 years and that they still think that doing it the way they did it 30 years ago is
Right.
still best practice. And that, but you can see how things get contorted there. And sometimes people are try to teach other people, but they end up teaching them bad habits because that's what they were taught.
Right.
So a lot of times we see those cycles over and over of, we're seeing high amounts of damage. Let's see where it's coming from. It's an OR. No, it's SPD. No, it's an OR. It's SPD. Rather than getting together and saying, what is our process? What do we expect from the OR after a case? Do they know what's expected? Because a lot of times I spend a lot of my days sitting in decon looking at case carts coming through.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all heard and been taught and trained on the lean process.
Mm-hmm.
So everything should be, at least we try to have everything that's separated the same way, so the decon can go through it faster and still be as thorough and not lose quality. But what I see a lot of times is every case cart comes through is it looks different. It's separated different. Some are sprayed, some are open, some are closed and sprayed. So it's very inconsistent. So when I see that, that kind of gives me an indicator of maybe I need to talk to the leadership and say, what are your expectations? Do you know what those are? When's the last time you visited your step-by-step process? And when's the last time you've trained that to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the easiest way out of something when you get reprimanded for not doing something the right way is I wasn't trained. Nobody trained me how to do that, right? I'm doing what I learned in scrub tech school, or
Mm-hmm.
so it's an easy out. And then even then, if we don't set up those processes and accountability to those processes, that's all you're going to hear. I wasn't trained. I didn't get that. I don't know. And then where does it go from there? It goes back into that cycle and gets churned
Right.
out.
Right.
So again, I try to work a lot with leadership on getting SPD and OR to sit down and say, what are our expectations? Do we have something written down, which most people do? But like, I've been in hospitals recently where their process, once they got it out, it was like throw a wet towel on the instruments, which that's still acceptable. There's nothing wrong, it's just not best practice, right? So,
Right.
and in this industry, we're always trying to move towards best practices where we can. So just looking at that process and what those steps are, making sure people know what's expected, and you'll see a lot leaner process. You'll see a lot more care and handling coming through rather than just throwing everything in a metal basin and then complaining that everything's dull.
Right. And I think that's really good, Cliff. And I really love what you're saying because, you know, for you all who might not know, I had a little dabble with Sterilization for about a year. Great people there. One thing about Steris I loved was that their education is second to none, and everything that they do, there's a very methodical approach to how they educate, and a lot of it is based upon observations. And so with them, they used to do what was called a process review. I think that's what Cliff was discussing, is where they're observing the whole process of sterilization. I worked in the flexible scope division, and they also did process reviews, and so that's just a really good way for them to identify some of the major problems. I remember working in the field with Cliff one day, and he was just showing me, see, this is how it happens. This is where it starts right here. So
Right.
it's great. It's great. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. And so it leads me to another question that kind of stems off of your first question, which would be, what are some common root causes of these cycles that occur in SPDs, particularly in relation to the workflow between the OR and SPD?
Well, one of the biggest things we're fighting right now, I say fighting, but really trying to, change the mindset is the pre-treatment of instruments. And I get it. I was a scrub tech, and I tell this to people all the time, but I was a scrub tech that everybody in SPD hated, because I was the guy we all have the one ortho guy. That was me, right? And,
Right.
and doesn't wipe the cement off and doesn't do this and doesn't do that. But I was able to reform myself a little bit because I got opportunity to work in sterile processing. And of course, right away, when the first set of reamers that I got that had cement on them, I saw right away why they were asking me to do that in the OR, right? So it opened my eyes a little bit, but pre-treatment's a big one. A lot of times the OR doesn't necessarily connect the dots and think that, well, by me opening these up and spraying these, one, it's going to prevent biofilm, which could prevent this instrument from passing, could take the instrument out of service, which could put my tray down, which could cause delay in cases, which, it just goes on and on right down like a domino effect, right? So that's a big challenge as well. And one thing we try to do with our biofilm in service, as much as we can, we try to push our customers to, let's do OR and SPD together.
Right. Right.
Because then when we're educating, we not only focus on, why SPD's got to focus on biofilm, but an important role that the OR plays in that. Because the best way to get rid of biofilm and eliminate biofilm is getting it early. Well, that's the wiping, the flushing, the spraying, that's why we're now best practices soaking in sterile water on the back table, right? So, getting our mindset around that and understanding that it's not just something that, we're trying. I heard somebody say, "Well, we don't, it's making SPD's job just easy." It was, no, it's not about making SPD's job easy. It's about getting these instruments back in a working manner proficiently, so that they're there ready to use when they're needed, right? And not going to grab a tray and seeing a missing tag on that tray because there's 2 or 3 items that are out for repair. So
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, I think pre-treatment is, like you said, it's the first place we start, whether if you're cleaning a scope or any type of instrumentation. It's the point of use, right? It's in the operating room, it's wiping down the instruments, it's making sure that I think even with the flexible scopes, there's a process that they take them through right after use, making sure that they do their pre-cleaning before it comes to you. So, and that's just excellent, like excellent. I call it the first line of defense, right? And making
Right.
sure the instruments are protected. And so I think that's really good. It leads me to go deeper into our conversation. Does cost have an effect on cycles as well as increased damage to the
Yes.
departments?
Absolutely, because these cycles they produce damage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so out of and so for example, um, you know, talking about biofilm, and now say in the flex scope, you're probably pretty familiar with one of the biggest things about that whole process is as soon as that procedure's over, they're supposed to flush it with that enzymatic to get anything that's in those channels. Well, if you don't do that, and then you have a biofilm, with stainless steel, we could take that and bead blast it and ultrasonic it and get it back to where it needs to be. But think about a flex scope. You've got those are plastic parts and pieces and rubber and nylon. You can't bead blast those; it'll destroy them, right? So you want to talk about cost? That's where it goes from say a bending rubber repair, what, couple $100 to a total overhaul. Because if you get biofilm in there or fluid invasion, because that's what happens a lot of times with those bending rubbers, if you don't catch that early and it gets fluid invasion, now the whole inside's rusted and corroded. And I mean, that could be what, $6, $7, $8,000 repair sometimes. So, I mean, holy cow. So there's where a lot of costs. And then I try to relate this to SPD as well, because sometimes I talk about that and they're like, well, especially like SSI rates and stuff, and they don't quite get, well, what is, I'm like, well, you understand that if a person comes back in with HAI, that the hospital doesn't get reimbursed for that.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, what does that mean for me? And I'm like, well, what that means for you is you may not get that borescope that you so badly want, or you may not, or you may not be able to hire that other staff member. I mean, I know
Right.
SPD, I think we've been shorthanded since the 80s. So,
Right.
so that's how
Absolutely.
I try to connect that with them. Well, I've been hearing you tell me that you have a hard time inspecting lumens. Well, if we could cut our SSI rate in half, there might be some money in that budget, because it's in our biofilm in service. Surgical site infections account for almost 1 million extra days stay in the hospital. So, and think about what it costs to stay in a hospital for 24 hours. It could be anywhere from $1,000 to a couple $100,000, right?
Right. Yeah.
Now multiply that by 1 million, and then take that number and realize that the hospital's not getting paid for that.
Right.
So it's a huge cost when you're talking about that type of stuff. So
Wow, that's a pretty huge statistic. 1 million days. That
I
is
mean,
major. I mean, you think about it. You think about what that's a major cost that the organization is paying for and
yeah.
sacrificing, and it's impacting.
The Joint Commission says that pre-treatment is one of the top 3 things that are non-compliant across the board. And then with those SSI rates, half of those SSIs that are documented in the U.S. every year are deemed preventable, which
Right. Yeah.
which means that we could change our behavior or process that would either eliminate or reduce that, the chances of that happening. So not only do we have a huge cost that we, that we're seeing go out the door, but we're also not being able to recognize that cost, if we do have it. So again, I know some hospitals, if something's documented in the OR, they have to write off $1 million for legal fees right there. So again, there's a lot of that cost involved, and that's why, one, you want to keep your SSI rates down. You want to monitor those. You want to find ways to help reduce them if they are. I mean, for one example, there was a hospital that was seeing their SSI rate in their labor and delivery. They were seeing their SSI rates go up, and they were doing little things here and there trying to do it. The last thing they did was they removed their tape and had their trays serviced, and within a year, their SSIs had been dropped in half.
Wow. Yeah. That's
So
amazing.
we use that example because it shows that maintenance on your trays, there is a perfect relation there, that having good maintenance on your trays is going to turn into better patient outcomes, right?
Yeah, that's good. No, that's really good. I mean, you think about costs, there's so many different types of costs, right? You think about your assets in the department.
Even down to what your staff is doing. If you've
Yeah.
got two people that are spending half of their day walking across campus to go pick up one case card, or think about using that manpower differently, and how can we set that up differently, just because there is a lot of hidden costs there that we don't think about, even just going into the SPD every day, right?
Right. Yeah. And that gets down to your processes, right? Like
Mhm.
actually visualizing your processes and seeing where is there room for improvement. I think Lean has a term Kaizen, right? Which is change for the better or continuous improvement. So making those continuous improvements definitely can help to have a great impact on your hospital and departmental costs. So that's
Absolutely.
that's really great, and I appreciate this conversation. It's really an important topic about identifying the cycles in sterile processing, and so it leads me to another wonderful question I think here that would bring great dialogue is regarding the communication breakdown. And so, in your experience, how does poor communication between departments contribute to these cycles, and what can we do to improve this?
Well, I mean, of course, if we don't communicate, especially in this arena, lots of things can go wrong, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, even down to people that go and have surgery, they write no on whatever limb that you're not supposed to. They
Right,
want to
the
make sure
timeout.
that.
Yeah. So,
But the communication is super key. Mainly, it's not so much. One, I think it's set up by leadership. SPD manager has to work closely with that OR manager, to make this go off correctly. Otherwise, you're going to have people butting heads. If you don't, if your leaders don't align their goals to meet the ultimate goal, then you're kind of running opposite directions trying to get to the same place, if that makes sense, right? But so communication is key. Where I think it is even more key is having those I hate to use the term key employees, but like those key people, like the case pickers, you know, because they talk to the leads, they get feedback from the leads. If they're not coming back with that feedback, we can coach them, hey, if you get something, bring it back, so we can improve it or we can address it or whatever it might be. Because sometimes I've seen places they tell a person and it goes nowhere. And then I'm like, well, what did you think that we were supposed to do? I don't know. I haven't been trained on that. Right. So communication is really key on a couple of levels. On the leadership level, of course, making sure that we're all aligned so that we know what to expect, not only from the OR and SPD, but how those trays go up. Are they coming up on the case card properly? I've seen where somebody will take a wrap tray and turn it sideways and stick it in the case card, and you hear all those instruments go ding, 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 ding.
yeah.
Well, that's damage, right? And then when the OR gets it, they're going to be like, what am I supposed to do with this? So that communication is unbelievable. I highly recommend anybody that is running these departments, if there's any way that you can, share the knowledge. Let some SPD folks go up and observe a case or two. Let some of those scrub techs come down and work a little bit in decon with SPD, because then you develop a love for one another because you know each other's pains. Like ideally, we want every case cart coming down and separated the same and very orderly. But then you've got spine cases that's got 20, 25 loaner sets. That's probably not going to happen in that case, right? Because there's so much. Even the scrub tech don't even know where everything goes, right? Because it's their loaner sets, so he's just grabbing stuff out of them. So again, that communication is unbelievably critical there, and I believe that including each other on your huddles, at
Hmm.
least having a representative from the OR at the SPD huddle, and vice versa. Maybe not everybody can make it, right? But if you can have representatives from each department at the other's huddle, maybe you could answer some of those questions, have some of those things addressed pretty quickly.
I think that's really, really good. I know I worked at a facility where we used to have, so the service leads for surgery, whether it's general, ortho, spine, whatever, they would meet periodically. We had and I actually was a sterile processing liaison. So I was in the OR, I was picking cases, had a phone, I had an office upstairs, I was delivering trays.
You're the man that I want to talk to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was the guy that was talking to the doctors to find out, if there was an issue, they would call me. We actually had a paper form that you would fill out, kind of like a unusual occurrence or something that
Mm-hmm.
happened that wasn't a what it was like a pink form, and it was the form that you knew, like if there was an issue in the case, the surgical scrub nurse would the circulating nurse would fill it out. It would come downstairs to the SPD leader,
You could
and
address
so
it immediately.
absolutely, yeah,
Oh, yeah, I 100% agree with you.
yeah, we love
Um,
that.
that incident. Now, I was at a hospital recently, and no, that's not. Some people scare away from that because they're like, I don't want. What if it's bad, right? What if, like, because I have a hospital that was keeping up with it, and in January they had like 35 incidences of anything from, you know, debris being in, whatever it might have been. It got rejected for whatever, 34, 35 of them. But then once they got that data, they were able to look at stuff and start honing in. Well, the next month they cut that in half.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
know, so it can actually tell your success story. Be like, look, this is what we started at here, and now 6 months later, we're down to 2 incidents a month, right?
Yeah.
So this is our story. So I love those because one, it helps you address things immediately, and then two, it's going to be your roadmap to success by looking at those things. So.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I love that as well. I mean, you're making so many good points. And the last point I want to just mention to this specific section, because it's something I'm very passionate about, is having a value-centered approach. And
Mm-hmm.
so putting value at the core, right? So when I got into this runner position, I was in the OR. I was, when I first got to the OR, nurses would be like, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" But after a while, I would bring a tray into the room and I would stand in the corner, and one of the nurses was like, "Well, what are you doing, Bill? Like, you can go back downstairs." And the doctor turned and he was like, "Bill's not going to leave until I open this tray and show him the instrument that's it." And that was my little thing. And so when other SPD techs would say, "Hey, well, we all do that job. What do you do differently?" I said, I just listen to the OR. If something's wrong with a powered instrument, I don't try to figure it out right there. The
Right.
patient's on the table, get him the new set.
Yep.
We'll worry about the bad set when it comes downstairs. And so that's something that I used to do. And so just transitioning or moving into more great discussion points here about, like, what about resetting processes? Like, how often should departments reset their processes and expectations, and then what strategies can be employed to facilitate these results effective or resets effectively?
Well, I would base how often, I would say generally every 1 to 2 years, probably pushing more to 2 years to look at those policies, but it really depends on how much turnover you have. I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
you've had a lot of new scrub techs, you're probably going to see the spraying go down or the separate, because they come in and they doing what they were told at the last place, right? Unless somebody's walking them through what your process is. But if you don't have it defined, there's nobody going to be doing that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, it depends on how your turnover, and even with SPD, how often you get new people in there. But again, it's good to do it every 2 years, just because, look at the differences in different recommendations every 2 to 3 years, right? We move towards best practices. So if our governing bodies are doing that, I would think that we should be able to try to emulate that in our departments as well. I'm looking at those things. But again, part of the reason that doesn't happen is we're short staffed. Our volume's going up and our staff is going down, and so there's lots of things, and that tends to sometimes get pushed to the side. But then when you get in those cycles that seeing lots of repair, lots of damage, and it's coming from our process because these guys don't know what's expected. Perfect example is acetabular reamers.
Mm-hmm.
I was an ortho tech. And here I am taking complaints from my doctors about how dull these things are. And then I'm throwing them in a metal basin and then dumping everything else on top of them and giving it to SPD going, these are dull. Who was the problem? I think I was the common denominator there, right?
Yeah.
So understanding that, hey, and I know those aren't the easiest things to wipe off, but let's wipe them or at least soak them when they're not being used, put them back on the racks and spray them down. Then they're not gonna get damaged as much, and they're gonna stay sharper longer. So that type of stuff there, and awareness. A lot of people just aren't aware. Perfect example is the rack right outside the wash. There's no tip protectors. There's no buffers. There's no any kind of protection whatsoever. And we toss them up on that stage and then stack them on top of each other. And that's where a lot of that damage might come from, right? Because it's just something sticking out and it gets landed on and there's a bend. So just that awareness. Now, are we going to catch all of that? Absolutely not. That's just the vulnerable area for our instruments. It's always going to be vulnerable. But if we have awareness and we're walking by and we grab a tray and we see something sticking out the other tray, be mindful of, hey, let's put that back in there so it won't get bent or damaged, right? So a lot of it has to do with that awareness.
Yeah, and I was just thinking what's so amazing is my previous podcast was about empowerment in sterile processing, and empowerment has to do with giving authority, empowered individuals, comprehensive training, encouraging certifications, opening communication, creating positive work environments. And it's so ironic how this episode right here is also empowering the sterile processors to be mindful of the cycles that they see in the department, and how knowledge, I always say knowledge is not power, but it's when you implement that knowledge, now you actually get that power. And so that leads me into training and education, and just really want to ask you, Cliff, like, what are your thoughts about how important ongoing staff training is in reducing these cycles that we're discussing today?
Well, I think it's very important, mainly because, if we don't recognize them, they're going to stay there, right? So, and I think the training, some people, we have accredited in-services that we do every year at places, right? However, people, well, I had that one last year. Yeah, but, things change, recommendations change, best practices change. And that's like sometimes you go into a place and somebody's been there for 30 years. They're still doing it like they did it 30 years ago. And some of it may not be wrong, but it's just not best practice. So as we know better, we got to do better.
Yeah.
And
I love that. I
yeah,
love that. I
I
love
mean,
that. As we
I
know
mean,
better, we have to do better. That was awesome.
well, just think about like
Wow.
back in the late 80s, early 90s. You used to see a lot of SSI rates because in total joints because of infection, right? I knew when I was growing up, I think everybody's grandma had their knee done at least twice. But that was because back then they could bring in a tray and say it was sterile and we go, okay, we'll use it. Now our jaws drop at that, even thinking about it, right? So now that we know better, we have to do better. And I think one thing that I would like to challenge leaders of sterile processing departments and ORs, find somebody to mentor. You'll make your life so much better as a leader because you'll have more people that you can depend on and understand why you're asking them to do things, but also mentoring, because what I see some of the cycle come from is that one SPD manager is at their wits end and just throws their hands up and quits. So, well, who takes their place? Probably the best lead tech that they have, but has that lead tech ever been trained on how to manage people or how to manage admin stuff? And then they get thrown into that, and then it's the same cycle again. They're frustrated, they're overwhelmed, they don't know how to get it done, they throw their hands up, and now we got, so it's another cycle that we're seeing. And if we mentored people, pick one person, two people that's in your department that shows potential, and a lot of times I like to pick ones that push back, that think they don't care, because then it's a challenge to me to show them that they do care. I don't have to make them. They do care, and I can prove it to you, right? So again, mentoring, I think, will go a long way. I'm not saying it doesn't happen at all, because I've come across some people that just changed my life, in my career by mentoring me a little bit. But in our SPD, I don't see that a lot. It's like a great lead tech gets shoved into that manager's position, and then they're like a deer in headlights, right? Like, oh goodness, I knew how to be a great tech, but I don't know how to. Managing people is one of the hardest things you can do. You can probably attest to that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Nobody's the same. No, so you got to be able to pivot and be audible ready. And so again, I think that's something that could really help. And there's people, some of like Sharon Combs and her team, Hank Bouch and his team, they do great work in
Yeah,
educating.
they're awesome.
and empowering, but that's mentoring as well, right? Both of them have worked into that, even though they're maybe not in the department now. They've worked there, they've been successful at it, and so they can help mentor people too. But leaders such as yourself, and I just want to say real quick, I'm going to do a little plug for you. Hey, I think you're doing great stuff. There's nothing more important than being positive, and I've seen nothing but positivity coming out of your podcast and
Thank
the
you.
message that you send. So I think, to your point, uplifting and empowering SPD, because when you uplift and empower them, they'll show you that they care.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, I appreciate the kudos, and it's really all about inspiring one another. And sometimes it's not all in education. Education is important, but sometimes it's just, you think about your most trying times in sterile processing. It's just having that good word of encouragement,
yeah.
relating. I think with mentorship, it's all about compatibility. When you
Hmm.
find someone that you're really compatible with and someone that you see potential with, and you pour into them, and it's what I get a lot when I used to work at union hospitals is I would say, let's precept students,
Hmm.
and the union workers would say, what am I going to get from that? Are they going to pay me more? And I used to get so stirred up because I used to be like, have you forgotten that someone mentored you, someone precepted you, someone trained you? Like everyone in this industry gets trained. You don't just go to hospital and just figure it out. I mean, this
Right.
isn't the military, right?
The students, I mean, I love working with anybody and everybody, but students are great because they're fresh and moldable, and you can teach them the right way to do it, right?
Yep.
And so I love that. I love using students. I think our industry, at least with sterile processing, could benefit greatly with working with some of these educational institutions that teach the scrub tech schools and the SPD certification.
Right.
I think if we work closer with some of them, we could probably see a lot more benefits than what we're already seeing.
Yeah, that's true. That's really true.
Yeah.
Yeah, mentoring students and giving back is so important. I mean, it's to me,
I mean,
it's
if a person walks
yeah,
into a job and it's a nightmare and they're not going to want to stay, right? We want people to stay in SPD. We want people to stay in the OR. We not just work until they're so burnt out that they can't do it anymore and then they just leave. We want that to be a positive experience. So let's train them up positively so that they keep that positive outlook. Yeah, it's a hard job. Sometimes it's a really hard job, but that's part of the challenge, right? You meet those challenges every day. I mean, if it wasn't a job, we'd all be on vacation, right?
no, that's so true. No, it's so true. I
So I
mean,
love challenges. I like that. I
yeah,
like figure this out now, right?
yeah,
So
challenges and opportunities cause you to grow. And sometimes the worst situation that you're in, you look back retrospectively and you say, "Man, I'm so glad I went through that experience because it caused me to really, really grow."
yeah,
So I really want to ask this next question. I think might be really, really good as well in regard to this conversation is in the context of measurement and accountability. So, like, what metrics or indicators do you think are essential for tracking these cycles in sterile processing, and how does measurement help hold the staff accountable?
good question. I mean, and we could take a couple different ways at this, but as far as like the um repeat your question, Bill. Sorry, I lost my track of thought.
No, it's okay. Yeah, in regards to measurement and accountability, so what metrics or indicators do you think are essential for tracking cycles in SPD, and how do we use these measurements to hold the staff accountable?
Absolutely. Well, we talked a little bit about it, like some of those incident reports or
Mm-hmm.
defect reports. I think that's one. I mean, that's one of the first steps that I would take, because if you don't know where you're at, how do you know where you're going?
Right, right.
So it's like if I don't know like how many incidents I'm seeing a month, how do I get better? I won't know until I baseline it, right? So baselining even down to your surgical site infections. Where are we at? What is our current state? And then where from this current state, where would we like to be?
Mm-hmm.
And then Then that's when you fill in the little steps. Okay, so we know
Right.
where we're at, we know where we want to be. So what steps can we take to get us here, right? So that's kind of the methodology that I use. But again, it's a lot of baseline and seeing where you're at. Even going back to your instrument trays, knowing what you've got and are you using it efficiently?
Right.
Down to, I was told this earlier today. I was at a hospital and I was looking at their inventory, validating their inventory. And I noticed, and it was looking at the usage report. They had a tracking system that had a usage report. So there was 5, it was Dr. So-and-so, I'm not sure but Dr. So-and-so's tray, and he had 5 of them. Well, then I looked at the usages, and out of all 5 trays, they'd only been used 4 times in the year. So my question was, why does he have 5 trays? And it was just an instance where they hadn't been able to address it. The doctor had backed off of surgery. He was getting ready to retire. He wasn't doing very many surgeries at all anymore. And then once we realized that, what we did, we were able to break down 4 of those trays, use those instruments elsewhere where they were needed. And he still had a tray that he could use, but he didn't have 5 of them just sitting on the shelf, never getting used. So looking at, right sizing your inventory, not even down to the instrument. And I know, honestly, it is a labor of love because it doesn't get done very often. But sitting down and the way I would do this, and a lot of people try to do it all at once, and it tends to be very overwhelming, and it tends to kind of peter out and doesn't get completed. But what happens is you should do it by service line and pick, okay, GYN, let's talk to these doctors that use this C-section tray and make sure that everything in this tray is they want in there and they need it in there. And if there's stuff in there that doesn't hit those criteria, let's take it out.
Right.
And then even on that, looking at how many trays you have, do you have enough? You remember from working with flex scopes, do they have enough flex scopes for the volume that they're doing?
Right. Right.
Same thing for instrument trays, right? Do you have if you've got one tray and you're using it 900 times a year, you might want to invest in another tray or 2 because 1, that tray's getting wore out over and over and over. And 2, it's being used so much that there's no time that your repair partner can get it out to get it serviced.
Right. No, this is interesting because it really leads to a question too that I think is important is like, can technology and automation help address some of these inefficiencies within the cycles? What do you think about like there's technologies that can assist with this?
Excuse me. Yeah, there is. Excuse me. There is, and like it comes down to a lot of times your tracking system. You want to be able to track uses. Now, there's some out there that say, yes, they track uses. However, if you don't implement a scan point that counts those scans or implement scanning on period, that data is not going to mean anything because you're not implementing it right? So again,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
so you've got to have that process in place so that you're getting the count. But even then, like with certain tracking systems, you have quality events. So instead of having a clipboard that you're marking, no, this wasn't sprayed, this wasn't separated, this wasn't whatever, you can have a scanner and you're scanning it. Then that tracking system will collect that data for you. You can pull a report and you'll know what case carts, are or not being treated properly. You can track it down to who the scrub tech was. But to your point earlier, if you do an incident report and that type of stuff you can address it even quicker.
Right. That's really great. And I'm not trying to, I know sometimes we give shout outs, but there's a new technology that just came out, a newer company that I just found out about. And the name of the company is Pegasus. They have a technology called Orion, like the Orion stars in space, Orion. And this technology, basically what this whole purpose of this company is to help reduce the weight of trays. And so what they do is they provide a tablet to the hospital. They do like a program where they monitor the trays, and after the procedures, the scrub tech will put the instruments that were used. Let's say it's a basic ortho set, maybe some osteotomes, and they put the instruments that were used on the back table or the Mayo stand. They take a picture, They upload the count sheet. It goes to their company's instrument techs, which go through this, and they verify that the instruments that they said were used were the right instruments. And then what they do is, at whatever the time frame that they've designated, they create a report to let the hospital know, this ortho tray in the past 6 months has used only 40% of the instruments. And it helps them to justify actually changing the weight or the amount of instruments in the trays, which I think is just amazing, right? Because it's really, and then you think
Well,
about,
we
I'm
used to have
sorry,
to do that by hand, right? You had to figure
right?
it out.
Yeah,
Do we use this? This ends up being 40% of the whole thing. We used to have to do all of the math ourselves, but that's good. I've also heard of certain ones that are trying to implement AI. So, like, it's got like a camera, and then when you put the instruments out, it identifies the instruments itself, and then you can confirm that you've got the right instrument. So that's
right.
pretty good too. That's pretty good.
Yeah,
And then there's also some that what we see most of the time is tracking that has the capability to put a picture too.
right. That's
So you
pretty.
can,
Yes, that's some great tech. I mean, there's some great technologies out there,
yeah,
So
absolutely. And I think we might get to see some beneficial ones with AI being able to recognize certain things. Especially in our arena. I mean, one little bend can change the name of the whole instrument, right?
yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And what I think is really good is that, we talked about defining the cycles. We talked about root causes. We talked about the impact on costs. We talked about communication breakdown. And in the beginning, you thorough explained expectations. We talked about how to measure, resetting our processes, how training is important. And so it leads me towards the end of our discussion about future goals. And so, looking into the future, what are the key goals that SPD should aim for to minimize cycles and enhance efficiency?
No, I mean, it's a really good question, and it comes down. I don't think that there's an exact answer for all hospitals because everybody's got their own little nuances and little things that work for them. But yeah, I mean, you just want to make sure that the word that keeps popping in my head I was trying to get away from is teamwork.
Mm-hmm.
It's just working together, aligning. I mean, I've been to so many hospitals where the OR doesn't even talk to SPD and vice versa, and I'm like, how does that even work, right? How do you not when you work so closely together? So I just think that teamwork and understanding that it is a team approach to patient safety. We couldn't do it without the surgeons. We couldn't do it without the scrub techs, and we certainly couldn't do it without sterile processing. So understanding that everybody has I tell people in SPD this all the time. You don't understand that every time you come in and clock in, you're saving lives. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to be you don't have
That's
to
the,
be over the patient to save
yeah.
lives, right? So I try to get them to understand that because for years in SPD we were the dishwashers, right? Nothing against dishwashers, but we do a lot more and a lot different than dishwashing, right? So having that pride about SPD, and part of that is things like this where we're uplifting SPD, we're uplifting the importance of their job, and I always make a joke out of it. I'm like, I've never seen a surgeon in decon, and I haven't.
That's
But
funny.
my point is one, they shouldn't be because we're trained professionals. Trained professionals are we're above dishwashers, and I hate using that term too because I washed dishes in my lifetime as well. So there's nothing wrong with it. But in this arena, it's not just washing dishes. There's a lot more to it, and you have to be a trained professional to know what to look for, where to look for it, all that good stuff. And I think that uplifting SPD is going to help that whole process because I mean, dude, where I came from, I used to have doctors bring in shop tools from their house and say, I need to sterilize. And what was crazy was like 9 out of 10 people in that department would have said, okay, because it was a doctor saying, I need this. And they would be like, okay, we'll figure it out. Where luckily I knew at the time, I was like, show me the IFU. If you don't have an IFU, it tells me how to sterilize it because it was chisels with wooden handles and we can't sterilize wood, right? So yeah, I was like, you give me the IFU, I'll sterilize it all day long. But what was so funny, everybody around me was like shocked that I turned down the doctor.
You told the
Look,
doctor no.
and I'm like, and I try to tell people all the time, I'm like, you guys have the same authority. If something doesn't seem right or look right or feel right, throw that red flag up. Now, somebody might come behind you and say, oh, no, this works out. This is good. We're good. But you still did your diligence by throwing that red flag up and saying there might be a potential for harm here, right?
Yeah, that's good. No, that's really good.
And a lot of SPD folks, they don't, they're scared to talk to doctors and nurses because they may not know the verbiage or they may not know necessarily what they're talking about, right? So again, in those senses, I would highly recommend, if you're working in SPD, educate yourself. That you can go to YouTube and pull up any procedure you want to see, and it'll be right there in front of you.
Yeah.
And SPD, people are like, well, why do I need to watch that? Well, you will see the instruments that you're inspecting. You will be able to see how they're used. So therefore, you will have a better understanding on how to inspect them and how to know if they're damaged or not, right? Some damage is very obvious, but other damage is not quite so obvious. So I know there was a lot of stuff there to answer that question, but you gave me a loaded question. But, it's all those things rolled up in one. I mean, you got to be dedicated to patient safety and understand that, a lot of SPD folks feel like that they're not even connected to the OR or to the patient. And I'm like, you're the first person that's connected to that patient.
Yeah, that's right.
I've even seen some places that after they have when they have a good procedure and the patient is recovering, that the doctor, the nurse, and even SPD folks get to go in and celebrate that with that patient.
Yeah.
And these are the people that help take care of you, right? You know how empowering that is to SPD folks?
Yeah, it's really good.
Be brought into a room and somebody says about you that you helped save this person's life. That's pretty powerful, right? So that's what I feel. I hope I answered your question. I know I kind of went off on a tangent there, but but that's it's the whole ball of wax, and you can't do it all at the same time. You have to, and I know you know this because you're a leader, but you have to prioritize. What do I need to do first? What second? And then knock them off, right?
Right.
But that priority is the main thing, because if you don't have some kind of priority list, you're kind of like just throwing darts at the wall, an empty wall. So
yeah, no, I think that's actually really good. And there's a question I skipped. I think it's really important. So maybe we could try to hold this until like maybe a minute response. But I think it's so important is really regarding leadership's role, and what role does leadership play in managing and mitigating the cycles, and how can the leaders support their teams in achieving these results? So you got 60 seconds.
All right, no worries. I would look at one, being an advocate for your department.
Excellent.
Make sure you're in those OR huddles, getting those complaints, addressing them, and then bringing it back to the department. Because when your people see you there fighting with them, not for them, not against them, but with them, they're going to trust you. They're going to know you're there for them. They're going to know your heart's in it. And then you're going to get, so much more out of your people when they have those feelings about you. So just be there for your people, and get out on that floor. I know it's hard for leaders to sometimes do that, but at least on the busiest part of the day when there's someone trays, get out on that floor and see if you can share some of your knowledge.
Right. That's excellent. No,
So,
I think that's really good. And I appreciate you answering that last question. And I really just want to add one thing to the future is really doing that assessment of your department and knowing if you were to grade your department, what is your grade? I know Lean speaks of the go-go's, go see, go touch, go hear, go feel, go smell, all the senses, and just kind of knowing where you are and then using that as the gauge to establish an action plan. I know when I first step into a leadership role, I always never make changes right away, but really try to just spend time with the employees, let them empty out all their frustrations, behind closed doors. I'm writing things down and I'm looking for that common thread. What is everyone saying? If everyone is saying, this is a major issue here, we don't have borescopes, or we don't have the installation testers, or we don't have this. So I think once you get that gauge of the department, then you're able to really make those changes. And then education, I mean, even throughout this whole conversation, and that's what made me really reach out to you as someone I look up to from an educator perspective, is just, bringing that education. A lot of times when there's an issue with an instrument, maybe an instrument that was supposed to have a piece that wasn't supposed to be attached after it was used, and it made its way through cleaning, assembly up to the OR. To me, that's an educational opportunity, and unfortunately everyone else has to endure through it that knows about that piece. But that education, it really helps us. So I think educating, creating those weekly education in services, as well as knowing the pulse of your department, is just some things I just wanted to add that I think can really help us to reach our future goals.
Absolutely. And I really love what you're talking about. Listen first. Because as a leader, and myself, I'm a fixer. I want to fix things. That's why I spent 14 years on the truck, was I want to fix stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So when you go in as a leader, though, it's really important to listen first, and not, because you may come in with some changes that doesn't make any sense to
Right.
anybody,
Right.
So agreed with you 100%. Listen first, and then move forward with those common threads. So agreed.
Yeah, and then too, you actually made me think about this. Even when you're asking your employees, sometimes you have seasoned employees that have been there a long time and they've tried a lot of things. And as a new leader, if you come in there and you're trying to make a change that they've already done, sometimes it's just good to pull that seasoned employee aside and say, hey, I'm fairly new here and I just want to know, what have we already tried? We already tried A, B, and C. And then asking them, what do you think will work? Well, I think maybe we should try this. And then incorporating some of the ideas is also a part of gaining the trust and
And
even,
it's it'll
yeah,
bring value.
absolutely.
Because that's when they're going to show you that they care.
Right,
Because
right.
they're like, hold on, he's asking me what I think. Well, hey, that's, and like I said, most people, some people, you're just going to get a gripe session, but most people are going to be like, hey, he's listening to me. I'm gonna lay it out and what I think, and that's where you get the caring. They
Right,
care.
right.
So
That's
agree.
that's awesome because it's such a collaborative effort. And so, well, I do want to thank Cliff for taking the time to come today. And some final
Thank you.
thought. Yeah, absolutely. I hope to have you back on again. I really enjoyed this. And some final thoughts today is, bad cycles in SPD don't break themselves. We have to take action. And if you recognize one of these cycles in your department, start by focusing on one small change. So my challenge today, and I know Cliff is with me on this, we say it together. If you're a tech, commit to slowing down and double checking those trays. If you're a lead tech, advocate for better training protocols. And if you're that manager leading the team, open up communication with the OR, partnering, collaborating with the OR, and every improvement, no matter how small, makes SPD stronger. So if you found today's episode helpful, share with a coworker. Let's work together to break the bad cycles. Thanks for listening to the Sterilization Station. And one last question for Cliff is, if I'm a technician, I'm listening right now and I'm saying, man, this guy was dropping bombs. There's gold all over the screen. Like, how do they reach you? How do people reach you if they want to network with you or they want to glean from your experience and go deeper with you?
Yes, I would love that. Call me. You can reach me at cliff_russell@steris.com. But email me. My phone number, 951-795-3068. You call me, we'll come in and start looking at your goals and what you want to achieve, and then how we can get you there. That's something I love tremendously, is getting in and working with those departments. So please, if you need some help or need some direction, let us know.
No, thank you, Cliff. Thank you for your information, and thanks for listening to the Sterilization Station. Until next time, stay sharp, stay focused, and keep making a difference. We'll see you in the next episode.